Yesterday, during the program, the story unfolded that just before jury selection in the trial of the accused Kanawha County sniper Shawn Lester, Lester pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of one of the three individuals killed in the sniper attacks. It was back in 2003 when those sniper attacks took place over the period of a couple of days. In fact, it was 9 years ago, next month in August. Killed three people. Nobody knew at the time whether this was whether it was related or whether it was random shootings. Remember, it came after the Beltway shootings, which were random. Authorities, including federal authorities, were somewhat divided as to whether this was another random shooting by some crackpot or whether there was one particular motivation, whether it was drug-related. And then, several months ago, Shawn Lester was arrested and indicted on all three murders. Just before the trial was set to begin yesterday, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of Jeannie Patton. Jeannie Patton, who was killed by a sniper attack in the Kanawha Valley at a convenience store there in 2003. He faces up to 40 years in prison. The other two individuals, the charges of murder were dropped in the murders of Gary Carrier Jr. and Okie Meadows Jr. as part of this plea agreement. So there's a lot of questions. This is a convoluted case. Let's get to the bottom of it now that has been essentially settled. I'm not sure fully resolved, but essentially settled with Kanawha County Prosecutor Mark Plants. Mark, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Hoppy. How are you doing?
I'm well, sir. Thank you. Okay, let me run through a series of questions for you that I have. In the guilty plea yesterday, there was an admission by Lester that he was involved with the murder of Jeannie Patton. But there was not, and correct me if I'm wrong, an admission that he was the triggerman. When Patton was murdered, there were three people in a vehicle. Lester was one of them. There were two other people. One of those is now dead. Are you convinced, as the prosecutor, that Shawn Lester was the guy who fired the .22 rifle that killed Jeannie Patton, A? And B, if so, why not have him admit specifically to that in court yesterday?
Number one, I'm 100% right that 100% sure that we got the right guy. As far as convincing people to admit things in court, I can only do that if I have evidence. That's the only reason why someone would come in and admit guilt. And you know what? They don't go over and beyond and admit things that I don't have evidence for. So I'm not surprised a bit that he would only admit to his involvement and wouldn't actually admit in court that he pulled the trigger. In fact, that's what the long string of witnesses, albeit the credibility would have been an issue at trial, but the long string of witnesses would have stated that over the last 8 years, Shawn Lester did in fact admit to them that he did shoot Jeannie Patton. Mm-hmm. Now, he never admitted to shooting Okie Meadows or Gary Carrier to those people, but over an 8-year period, he did admit to shooting Jeannie Patton. And in court yesterday, again, our evidence was that he was involved in the shooting. And in the end, in all murder cases, if you've got more than one person, if you've got three people in a vehicle, and you can pin them down to definitely be in that vehicle, they all start pointing fingers. And right. I've got to prove which one actually pulled the trigger. That becomes very, very difficult in all murder cases. But
you believe that Lester was the guy who pulled the trigger. You know that.
Yes, I believe that.
Okay. All right. Now, Lester shot and killed Jeannie Patton, and the story was because, as some sort of retribution, because Patton's longtime boyfriend, Marty Walker, stole meth from Lester that Lester had gotten from a Mexican drug dealer. Is that why? That seems, if that was the case, why didn't Lester kill Marty Walker instead of Marty Walker's girlfriend?
Right. Let me answer it by saying this. Is number one, in all murder cases, the why, I never really have any of the answers as to why. I just have the evidence that's left over once a crime is committed. This case, there's a few different theories that are out there. One witness would have came in and said that Shawn Lester said that, hey, one way of getting away with murder is you kill one person that you really want to take out, and you kill a few other people to confuse and throw off the investigation. It may have been that there's some evidence that these victims knew Shawn Lester through the drug trade, that he thought they were somehow involved with the stolen engine and the stolen drugs. Another theory is that maybe Shawn Lester had to prove to the Mexican drug lords, I will say, his contact Tito, that hey, I didn't take these drugs, and I need to prove that I didn't take these drugs to this drug dealer. So the only way that I can do that is take revenge on the people that did this.
Okay.
And maybe if I can't get to the people I want to get to, I'll get to the loved ones. That's another theory.
Mark Plants is with us, Kanawha County Prosecutor, on the guilty plea yesterday by the Kanawha Valley sniper, Shawn Lester. Do you believe that Lester was the trigger man? Do you believe that Lester used that .22? We know the .22 rifle was used in all three of the sniper murders. Do you believe that Lester was the trigger man? You know he was in Patton. Do you believe he was in the other two?
I don't know. I don't know. All I can say is I don't have any evidence other than that gun linking Shawn Lester to those other two murders. So I just don't have enough evidence to know that. And certainly, when I go to a trial, I have to convince 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that he pulled that trigger, or is in at least some way involved or conspired with or was in a concerted action with people who pulled that trigger. And that would have been very, very difficult. In fact, that's why the case resolved yesterday, is there's high risk on both sides. I go in there and we try that case. There's a 50-50 chance of winning. That's a 50% chance that Shawn Lester walks out of there free, and a 50% chance that maybe I do win, and he gets life in prison. That's why you have lengthy conversations with the family of the victims, and you educate them on, hey,
right,
here's the dice that we got to roll here. And in the end, in the interest of justice, I take my 40 years and then we get it resolved.
Yeah, I understand. So, and he faces up to 40 years in prison. But you were prepared to go to trial to try to prove that Lester was responsible for all three. Now, granted, you didn't have a great case. That's why you took the guilty plea. I understand that. And I think it makes perfect sense. He's going to be locked away for a long time. But you were prepared to go to trial. Therefore, you must have had a theory. You were going to try to show how Lester was involved in the deaths of Gary Carrier and Okie Meadows. So what were you going to try to show?
Well, the storyline that we knew, the evidence showed as far as witness testimony, was that, and the physical evidence that the engine was located, and the storyline was going to be that this engine was stolen, and Shawn Lester and others. I'm not saying that the other two people in that vehicle weren't totally innocent. I'm just saying that I know that Shawn Lester was involved. Now, how do I know they were involved in the other two? The other two victims, again, also can be traced right back to Shawn Lester's garage, and he knew all three of those victims. They all three were connected one way through other, either through drug abuse, drug addiction, or the drug trade in general. So the three victims in this case can be linked right back to Shawn Lester, and I've only got evidence that he pulled the trigger or was directly involved in one of the shootings, but I just can't ignore that connection.
Right.
And to win those charges, we would have had a jury instruction that said, to be a principal in the second degree is just as guilty as a principal in the first. In other words, if Shawn Lester's driving that vehicle and and someone else pulls the trigger on the other two, on Gary Carrier or Okie Meadows, he's just as guilty as the person that pulled the trigger.
I understand.
And that would have been the evidence. That would have been the theory of our case. Was it questionable? Could we have won? We could have won, and we could have lost. I don't know.